WRI was established in the early 1980s as a pure policy research institution. It's since evolved into what we call a results-oriented institution that focuses more on changes in the world rather than the number of publications we produce or the number of presentations that we deliver. So it's much more driven by changes in the world that we hope to achieve, which could be policy changes or changes in practice, things like that. We're organized around 6 major programs or goals. We have a cities program, we have a climate program, an energy program, a forests, a water, and a food program. And then we have a number of centers that sort of cross-cut all of those 6 programs. And those 4 centers, if you like, are governance, business, economics, and finance as well. And our job really is to provide the support to those 6 major initiatives. So I work principally in the governance program, and my project is housed in the governance program, but I spend as much time working with climate as I do with forest program, as I do with the governance, the other programs within the governance. Cities program, the Cities and the Transportation program, that's at WRI, is probably our largest in terms of staff, in terms of office, in terms of budget. There are projects underway and offices established in 4 or 5 different countries around the world. Our interest has shifted. It was principally transportation only. And recently, over the last 2 or 3 years, has really shifted more to a sustainable cities initiative. And we're building that program out a little bit. So the work that I do is really around land rights. And we are now exploring with cities about the land rights issues that are associated with city development, sustainable city development. So for example, in India, we are looking at the various approaches by which local leaders bring land together for public purposes, whether it's for a park or whether it's for an urban transportation project. And the various different approaches that have been used by the different cities in India, and looking at it from the perspective of land rights and what is most efficient, what's most appropriate, and what respects land rights best. Land rights is a politically charged issue. It's a human rights issue. It is the principal source of wealth and maybe therefore power in many countries in Africa. I work principally in Africa, but I think you will find similar kinds of scenarios in other places around the world. We work on land issues not just from a land rights perspective. We look at it from a climate change perspective. We look at it from a rural livelihood perspective. And I think when you address those kinds of issues through those lenses rather than just a justice lens or a human rights lens, then I think that helps quite a bit in addressing these issues. We also, all of our work is really done in partnership with local organizations. So in most countries in Africa, for example, we work with public interest environmental law organizations that have deep connections with the government as well as with the parliament and the judiciary. And so we work in partnership with them so it's not seen as though it were a prescription coming from Washington, D.C. Their urbanization is particularly moving ahead in many countries in Africa, but it's also in India as well, and Asia broadly, and in Latin America as well. I think there's an urban perspective to this, there's a rural perspective to this. From an urban perspective, a lot of our work is, as I said, is evolving from a pure transportation to a sustainable cities perspective. We believe that a lot of our work is driven by sustainable transport system and then working around those issues as well. But we are familiar also with the 100 cities that are being developed in India, and those are likely to be developed in areas that are not heavily urbanized right now. So it actually includes the acquisition of quite a bit of rural land for the development of these new megacities that are going to be developed. We work principally in the rural aspect of all of this, and much of our work is around collective land rights, whether that's by communities that still hold their land in a customary way, under customary tenure arrangements, or whether those are indigenous people that hold land and still manage that land in a collective manner. The implications of urbanization for them and the implications for rapid economic development are profound and significant in many cases. So you hear about these large-scale land acquisitions that are taking place, whether that's for mining or other extractive resource extraction, or whether they are for large-scale agricultural activities, palm oil plantations or sugar plantations, or even plantations for biofuels, which can be quite problematic, both from the perspective of land being lost, but also from the perspective that many of those biofuels haven't really materialized as sound investments, and so many of the early investments, at least in many countries in Africa that I work in, have gone bust, and the land that the communities have lost have actually not been returned to them. So there's quite a bit of potential impact of these types of investments on rural people. The principal angle that we have been working on is forestry and how securing rights over forests, community rights over forests, can be a sound mitigation strategy. There is ample research now that shows that if communities have secure rights to their land, their forest land, and if those rights are realized, in other words, they are protected from concessions and from arbitrary or irregular acquisitions, then the deforestation rates in community forests are lower than they are in similar areas outside of those secure community forest lands. And so our hope is that the climate negotiators, the climate funds, see securing rights as a sound investment strategy for their efforts to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And so that's been our principal angle to the forest and climate debate. There are a lot of positives that have come out of Paris. There are some very strong statements on forests. And so I think we got, from a forest perspective, we have some very strong positions in the Paris Agreement. Now, of course, the challenge is in terms of implementation of that. And so we've shifted a little bit of our attention now, and more so over the coming years, to the commitments that the various governments have made under the Paris Agreement. And so we've been looking at these so-called INDCs to see how forestry features into their climate commitments, and if forestry is a central component, whether securing collective land rights is an approach that they have identified to protect forests and reduce deforestation rates. And our early look at some of the INDCs from Brazil and from Colombia, from Bolivia, all of them that are part of the Amazon basin, for example, have recognized forest as a sink, as a carbon sink. The INDCs haven't specifically identified securing rights as a strategy to protect forests, but we hope to work with a number of countries to see that as a sound approach to their forest objectives, to meeting their forest objectives. There was quite an effort by WRI to engage in the SDG process in working with the negotiators regarding the goals and the targets, and now increasingly the indicators that are going to be developed. That's a mixed bag. There are some very strong targets in there that are consistent with some project opinions and perspectives from here, from WRI. There are others that haven't quite reached that level. So, for example, I have worked quite a bit to try to encourage the SDG negotiators to establish a separate target on securing collective land rights. That has not happened, and we are working now to try to at least develop an indicator for collective land rights. And we have some language in there that we can lean on, and our hope actually is that some of our platforms that WRI has developed can be used as a way to monitor progress toward the various SDG goals and targets and the monitoring of the indicators. So, for example, we launched with 12 other land rights organizations last November an online platform called Landmark, which provides the boundaries of the lands held by communities and indigenous people. And so where the indicator provides, the SDG indicator calls for securing indigenous lands, this could potentially be a platform for monitoring progress on whether indigenous lands are better protected or not, as consistent with the SDG indicators. And there are a number of other platforms that we have that can be used. The Global Forest Watch, the Aqueduct, that can also be used as potential ways to monitor progress on the SDGs. So we have carved out, I think WRI has carved out a core competency, if you like, in this area. There are a number of platforms that we have developed that are sort of geospatial, georeferenced information on the platform. I mentioned a couple of them already. Landmark, that provides very precise boundaries of indigenous and community lands. The Global Forest Watch provides near real-time data on forest cover and looks at deforestation rates and a number of other aspects of forestry. We have an Aqueduct platform that looks at water. And we are considering a broader platform that we're tentatively calling Resources Watch, which will bring a lot of these platforms that we've developed together. and we'll hopefully go beyond just forest, water, and land, and also deal with a number of other natural resources as well. So we do a lot of mapping, and we think that the georeferenced information is very important to policymakers as they make their decisions. So there are a number of things that we do that go beyond the nation state. WRI was first created with a real focus on the development of global public policy, and thus our strong interest in international agreements and international standards and so on. So we have a long history working with the international conventions. But we've also spent a lot of time at continental levels and at regional levels. So in East Africa, for example, working with the East African community officially, but in less formal, less official. We do have a long history bringing civil society together across boundaries to encourage sharing of information, encourage collaboration around common issues and addressing common concerns. So we work at a scale larger than the nation state, both with civil society and with governments.